Hello guys, you are seeing Prime News Australia, where we show you the latest and important news of Australia in the fastest and reliable way. So come, let's start by not delaying. 25 big updates of the Australia, especially for you. Before proceeding in the video, comment by commenting from which state you are watching, and also like video, so that YouTube can reach this video to more people of Australia. Australia has declared its support for U.S. action against Iran to prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon and, quote, to prevent Iran continuing to threaten international peace and security. But Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs has warned of the risk of, quote, reprisal attacks and further escalation across the Middle East after the attack. In a statement issued on Saturday evening, Anthony Albanese said, Australia stands with the brave people of Iran in their struggle against oppression. The Prime Minister said Iran's ruling regime had been a destabilizing force for decades, through its ballistic missile and nuclear programs, support for armed proxies, and brutal acts of violence and intimidation. The memories of all those murdered by the Iranian regime were at the forefront of Sahar Golizada's mind when she heard that the country's supreme leader had been killed. I started shaking and I started crying, remembering all of those beautiful lives that we lost and all of those people that would be so happy to see this day, she says on Sunday from Melbourne. The Iranian Australian, who fled Iran's theocratic regime almost 15 years ago, describes the news as a bittersweet but big moment for the country and its diaspora. We've been waiting for this, the 50-year-old says. In Melbourne, members of Australia's Iranian diaspora gathered in Federation Square and on the steps of Parliament to celebrate after years of violence, most recently culminating in the regime's brutal crackdown of protests, with up to 30,000 people estimated to have been killed. Surin Edgar, the vice president of the Australia-Iranian Community Alliance, AICA, says hearing of Khamenei's death was the best morning of my life. He destroyed our country, our culture, killed our people, and pushed the ideology of terror to other countries, he says. America and Israel's attack on Iran disrupted flights across the Middle East and beyond, as countries around the region closed their airspace, and 3 of the key airports that connect Europe, Africa, and the West to Asia halted operations. Hundreds of thousands of travelers were either stranded or diverted to other airports after Israel, Qatar, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Bahrain closed their airspace. There also was no flight activity over the United Arab Emirates, flight tracking website FlightRadar24 said, after the government there announced a temporary and partial closure of its airspace. International law experts have criticized Australia for rolling over and backing what they say is an illegal attack by Israel and the U.S. on Iran. The Foreign Minister Penny Wong endorsed the fresh war by stating that, quote, Australia supports action to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent Iran from continuing to threaten international peace and security. At the Grammys, his 2025 album Debí Tirar Más Fotos became the first predominantly Spanish-language album to win Album of the Year. In his acceptance speech, Bad Bunny directly criticized the Trump administration's harassment of immigrants and dedicated the award to all the people that had to leave their homeland, their country, to follow their dreams. That sentiment resonated deeply with Latin American and Caribbean diasporas worldwide, including in Australia. My family Webb remembers her son Jeremy was always getting tics, because he spent a lot of time in the bush, camping and mountain bike riding, around the property where he grew up on the central coast of New South Wales. When Jeremy began to get really bad reactions to eating meat, or even when the scent wafted through the house if she was cooking a pork roast, Webb remembered reading an article about an immunologist who identified the connection between tick bites and developing mammalian meat allergy. Soaring, scorching, record temperatures, yet again, distressing, protracted droughts, raging fires, and devastating floods. Australia's summer is drawing to a close, and a reprieve from climate whiplash can't come soon enough. We've witnessed and suffered immense losses, and deep heartache for wildlife, ecosystems, and our communities. There was a time when the dire potential consequences of climate breakdown and environmental destruction were warnings, calls from scientists and experts for increased and urgent action. Now an unsettling possibility feels like a disturbing reality. As Governor-General, Sam Mostyn has set herself a clear mission to foster a culture of kindness, care, and compassion in Australia. It is her mantra. She says it over and over, and clearly believes it is not only desirable, but possible, a way of demonstrating Australian values to the world. The contrast between her heartwarming talk and the brutal language of politics could not be sharper. It is one thing for those on the fringes to demonize others. Fostering fear, envy, and anger are their stock in trade. Now a new opposition leader needs to make his mark. Predictably, he immediately suggested more punitive laws. Nearly 3 violent or menacing threats against federal politicians are being reported to police daily, according to Australian Federal Police data, with rates almost doubling in 2 years. The soaring danger for elected officials and their staff reached new heights this week when Anthony Albanese was evacuated from the lodge in Canberra over a bomb threat. The AFP confirmed reports of violent threats, including death threats, against federal politicians have been on the rise, almost doubling from 555 in 2021-22 to 951 reports in 2024-25. While internal divisions have long been the Victorian Liberal Party's main obstacle to winning government, a new threat is emerging on its right flank: One Nation. Just 4 years ago, One Nation received just 8,077 lower house first preference votes out of more than 3.6 meters cast in Victoria, equivalent to 0.22% of the total, and won a single seat in the upper house. Human rights are not applicable only to some people. They apply to everyone. One of my first forays into the world of human rights was a university internship at a human rights organization. We received a letter from a man whose name I recognized from a notorious murder case. He described ill treatment of other prisoners by prison guards. The prisoners he named were among Australia's most notorious convicted serial killers. I got the news that Aotearoa's most internationally famous Prime Minister is moving to Sydney in a way that is only possible in New Zealand. I was at the final Splore Festival in Tapapakanga at the weekend, one of our longest running and arguably most beautiful festivals, when Clark Gayford, Jacinda Ardern's husband, popped up next to me on the dance floor dressed as a giant toadstool. "Yeah, we're moving to Sydney," he said to a man in funereal pirate garb. "Can't wait." A genuine policy contest has finally broken out over housing in Victoria, but it is as much about politics as it is about planning. The opposition leader, Jess Wilson, on Wednesday announced a plan to expand Melbourne's capital city zone, effectively expanding the CBD to take in Collingwood, Fitzroy, Fisherman's Bend, North Melbourne, Parkville, and parts of Southbank not already included. This will mean height limits can be lifted, density increased, and development encouraged to restore vibrancy to the city. Demand for inner urban living from young professionals, downsizers, students, and small households remains strong, but supply has not kept pace, Wilson told the Victorian Chamber and Herald Sun's Future Victoria Summit. With less than 3 months to go until the federal budget, you are going to be hearing a lot more about tax. It seems that something is finally going to be done to fix the capital gains tax, but already Conservatives are working to give the richest another tax cut. This week, a Senate committee into the 50% CGT discount has held inquiries. My colleague Matt Gridnoff and I made a submission to the committee, and Matt provided evidence on Tuesday. Regular readers, however, will not be in any doubt of my position. I have written long and loudly on the topic. Not only has the 50% CGT discount distorted the housing market and coincided with the biggest decline in housing affordability in our history, but it massively favors the richest. Those earning more than $250,000 a year make up just 2.5% of all individuals, but they account for 2/3 of all the capital gains. Dying Australians approved for government-funded aged care home support are struggling to access it, with carers describing a system plagued by delays and lack of control around how funding is spent. The accounts of carers and aged care assessors spoken to by Guardian Australia show that beyond the controversial, algorithm-driven assessment process for home care funding, many are left without adequate and timely support even after funding has been approved. Last October, Dixie farmer Darren Vickers completed construction of the 2.8-acre open shed that will house both his new dairy and 600-strong milking herd. 25 kilometers away in Timboon, Simon Schultz is also building a new pasture-based shed for his 450 cows, due to begin operating in May. Inside these sheds, their 1,000 cows will be milked not by humans, but by robots. Robotic milkers, known in the industry as automated milking systems, AMS, are set to transform the farmers' daily lives, which previously revolved around morning and evening trips to the dairy.